It's March 19th, 1919, and across New Orleans, something unprecedented is happening. Every home, every saloon, every street corner is alive with music. Jazz music. Loud, frantic, desperate jazz music pouring from windows and doorways into the humid Louisiana night. But this isn't a celebration. This is survival. Because somewhere in the darkness, a killer is listening. A killer who promised to visit New Orleans that very night. A killer who claimed he would spare anyone who played jazz music in their homes. Welcome to the story of the Axeman of New Orleans, a serial killer who terrorized the city for over a year, murdered at least 6 people, and then vanished. This is his story. The nightmare began on a humid May morning in 1918. Joseph and Catherine Maggio lived above their small grocery store on the corner of Upper Line and Magnolia Streets in a working-class Italian neighborhood. Joseph was a barber. Catherine helped run the store. They were well-liked, hard-working, the kind of people who never caused trouble. On May 23rd, Joseph's brothers arrived at the store and found the door standing open. That was strange. Joseph always opened promptly at dawn, but the store was dark and empty. When they called out, no one answered. They went upstairs. What they found would haunt New Orleans for the next 18 months. Joseph and Catherine Maggio lay in their bed, their heads split open by an axe. Blood soaked through the mattress, pooling on the floor below. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. The killer hadn't brought a weapon. He'd used the Maggio's own axe, which he'd taken from their shed in the backyard. And that wasn't all. A panel had been carefully chiseled out of the back door, not broken, not smashed, chiseled. Precise, methodical, the kind of work that takes time. The killer had stood in the darkness, in their backyard, working quietly while the couple slept just feet away. The police found the bloody axe on the back porch, left behind like a calling card. New Orleans was shocked. But this was 1918. The city was reeling from World War I. The Spanish flu was killing thousands. One brutal murder, while tragic, seemed like an isolated incident. A robbery gone wrong, perhaps, a personal vendetta. They were wrong. Just weeks later, on June 28th, a baker named John Zonka was delivering bread before dawn when he noticed the door to a grocery store standing open. Inside, he found Louis Bessemer and his partner, Harriet Lowe, both struck in the head with an axe while they slept. Bessemer survived. Lowe would die weeks later, but not before making a strange, delirious claim that Bessemer was a German spy. The panel in the door had been chiseled out. The axe came from their own shed. On August 5th, it happened again. Sisters Mary and Pauline Bruno were attacked in their sleep. Mary died. Pauline survived, but could remember nothing. Once again, chiseled door panel. Once again, the victim's own axe. The pattern was undeniable now. Someone was moving through New Orleans, targeting Italian grocers and their families, entering through carefully prepared doors and attacking them in their beds with their own axes. But who and why? The police had no answers, no witnesses, no suspects, just bodies and questions. As summer turned to fall in 1918, fear gripped New Orleans. Italian families stopped sleeping in bedrooms that faced the street. Hardware stores sold out of locks and bolts. Some people sat up all night with guns across their laps, jumping at every sound. The police increased patrols, but how do you catch someone who strikes without warning and leaves no trace? On August 10th, the Axeman struck again, attacking Joseph Romano in his home. Romano managed to fight back, and his nieces saw a dark figure fleeing into the night. But the description was vague: tall, heavy-set, wearing dark clothes. It could have been anyone. Romano died 2 days later from his injuries. Then, as mysteriously as the attacks had begun, they stopped. September passed, October, November. The city began to breathe again. Maybe the killer had died in the flu epidemic sweeping the nation. Maybe he'd moved on. Maybe he'd been scared off by the increased police presence. Maybe. But on March 10th, 1919, the Axeman returned with a vengeance. Orlando Giordano heard screaming coming from their neighbor's house. He rushed over to find Charles and Rosie Cortimiglia covered in blood, their 2-year-old daughter Mary lying on the floor, her skull crushed. The chiseled door panel, the family's own axe, the same methodical, nightmare precision. But this time, something different happened. Rosie Cortimiglia survived, and she had something the police desperately needed. She could identify the attacker. She pointed the finger at Orlando Giordano and his son, Frank, the very neighbors who had found her and called for help. The police arrested the Giordanos immediately. Finally, they had their men. Finally, the nightmare was over. Except it wasn't. Because 3 days later, on March 13th, 1919, something extraordinary happened. Something that would cement the Axeman's place in American folklore forever. A letter arrived at the Times-Picayune newspaper.
The letter was unlike anything police had ever seen from a serial killer. It began, "Hell, March 13th, 1919, esteemed mortal of New Orleans." The writer claimed to be a demon from the hottest hell, not a human being, but something far worse. He mocked the police for arresting the Giordanos, saying they had the wrong men. He bragged about his killings and promised more to come. But then the letter took a bizarre turn. The Axeman announced that on the night of March 19th, just 6 days away, he would visit New Orleans again. He would pass over any home, but only those where a jazz band was playing. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, "I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing." He would spare them, but if he could hear no jazz music, then he would pay them a visit with his trusty axe. The letter ended, "Undoubtedly you Orleanians think of me as a most horrible murderer, which I am, but I could be much worse if I wanted to. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell." He signed it, The Axeman. Was it real? Was it a hoax? The police couldn't be sure, but they couldn't take the risk. The newspapers published the letter in full, and New Orleans responded in the most extraordinary way imaginable. On the night of March 19th, 1919, the entire city exploded with jazz music. Dance halls that normally closed early stayed open all night. Cabarets were packed to capacity. Every home with a phonograph played jazz records at full volume. Amateur musicians gathered in the streets. Piano players pounded out ragtime. Horn players blew until their lips bled. The noise was deafening, chaotic, desperate. A local composer even wrote a song called The Mysterious Axeman's Jazz, which became a local hit and sold thousands of copies. New Orleans played jazz like their lives depended on it, because maybe, just maybe, they did. That night, the Axeman did not strike. The city exhaled. Had the music saved them? Had the letter writer kept his word? Or had it all been a macabre joke? No one knew, but it didn't matter, because the attacks weren't over. The Giordanos went to trial in May 1919 for the murder of little Mary Cortimiglia. Despite having no physical evidence connecting them to the crime, despite Rosie Cortimiglia's testimony being the only evidence against them, and despite the fact that the attacks matched the Axeman's pattern perfectly, they were convicted. Frank Giordano was sentenced to hang. His father received life in prison. But the Axeman wasn't finished. On August 10th, he attacked Sarah Lauman while she slept. She survived and remembered nothing. On September 3rd, he attacked 19-year-old Sarah Lauman, no relation, who also survived. And on October 27th, he struck for what would be the final time. Mike Pepitone was a grocer, like so many of the Axeman's victims. His wife heard screams from their bedroom and rushed in to see a dark figure fleeing through the door, axe in hand. Mike died before dawn. His wife couldn't give a useful description, just a man, average height, dark clothes. He'd disappeared into the New Orleans night like smoke. And then, silence. November passed. December. 1919 turned to 2020. Months became years. The Axeman never struck again. In 1920, Rosie Cortamilia, racked with guilt and possibly mental illness, recanted her testimony against the Giordanos. She admitted she'd lied. The father and son were released from prison, their lives destroyed, but at least they were free. The real Axeman was never caught. So who was the Axeman, and why did he stop? Over the past century, theories have multiplied like shadows. Some believed he was a member of the Black Hand, the Italian organized crime network, targeting grocers who refused to pay protection money. But why the bizarre letter? Why the theatrical elements? The mafia was brutal, but this seemed different, personal. Others wondered if he was mentally ill, his delusions underlings or voices only he could hear. The letter suggested someone educated, theatrical, possibly craving attention. Serial killers often want recognition for their work. One intriguing theory suggests he may have been Joseph Mumfree, a criminal who was shot and killed in Los Angeles in December 2020 by the widow of Mike Pepitone, the Axeman's final victim. She claimed Mumfree had murdered her husband, though she provided no evidence and was acquitted of murder on grounds of temporary insanity. Mumfree had a criminal record and had been in and out of prison, coincidentally being released just before the attacks began and imprisoned again when they stopped mid-year in 1918. Was Mike Pepitone's widow a grieving woman who killed an innocent man, or did she track down the Axeman and execute him in the street, delivering the justice New Orleans never could? We'll never know for certain. What we do know is this. Between May 1918 and October 1919, someone terrorized New Orleans. Someone who killed at least 6 people and injured dozens more. Someone who understood psychology well enough to terrify an entire city with a single letter.